Tonight on Bridge City News, the man accused of roaming the grounds of Rideau Hall armed is charged. We break down what we're learning about the Army reservist and his motive. Lethbridge has a new police chief, and he's ready for the responsibility that comes with the job. And we visit a local restaurant to try an exotic dish.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. What motivated the man who allegedly crashed through the gates of Rideau Hall? What did he want as he moved towards the Prime Minister's home? Investigators aren't revealing that yet, but police are making one thing very clear, that the suspect was heavily armed. Canadian Army reservist Corey Hearn faces 22 charges, most of them weapons offenses.
On July 2nd at approximately 6:30 in the morning, a lone male breached the main pedestrian entrance at 1 Sussex Drive at Thomas Gate with a vehicle which was disabled on impact. National Capital Commission workers noticed the vehicle breach and notified the Corps Commissioners who are on the site of Rideau Hall, who approached the area and observed the male walking with what appeared to be a firearm. Around 6:40, the accused was seen on the grounds of Rideau Hall by our members, who are stationed there as part of the ongoing security detail. At 6:43, our team confirmed they had visual contact with the suspect. Moments later, at 6:45, RCP members engaged discussion with the subject. It was only at 6:53 where the suspect responded and a dialogue ensued. Our members relied on their training and instinct to continue speaking with the suspect until just before 8:30, at which point he was apprehended without any incident and taken into custody for questioning. If you look at every intervention that we do, it always starts with the police presence, verbal, and try and de-escalate the situation.
On August 31st, the city of Lethbridge will welcome its newest police chief. Chief Shaheen Medizadeh joins the LPS after serving more than 30 years with the RCMP. The incoming chief spoke with the media Friday morning and said he is humbled and honored to serve our community and lead the LPS.
Policing is an expensive venture in any community. So as taxpayers, I often say, nobody works for me. Coming as a chief of police, some people have the ideology that people work for them. Nobody works for me. We all work for our citizens because that's who is actually hiring us to perform a duty. And I want to keep that as a team concept. So leadership to me is not about your rank or title, doesn't buy you, those things don't buy you power. Rank and title, they just give you levels of accountability. The higher you go, the higher accountability you have. And my accountability as a chief here will be to every employee in Lethbridge Police Service and also every citizen in this community.
The Lethbridge Farmers Market is almost reaching capacity for vendors, and every week new ones show up. Today we caught up with Robert Luco, owner of Luco Farms Mustards, on having faith like a mustard seed at a time like this.
It's actually a really nice experience. The vendors are starting to come back in. We have almost a full house now, and the clients and customers are coming in, and we're really enjoying having that interaction with them again. Yes, the restrictions, the social distancing and the space between the booths is significantly increased, and it's just a little different. We don't have as much contact with our neighbor vendors. The sales actually have been pretty brisk, which is very good. We certainly appreciate Lethbridge residents and the Southern Alberta people supporting our local producers and products. We bring in new customers, but we have a very loyal following. I think one of the biggest issues that we've had this year is that some of the local restaurants that were buying our products commercially have either gone out of business or have, significantly had their revenues reduced, which impacts us as suppliers. I think most of the vendors here have either sneeze guards up or are wearing masks and gloves, and we have hand sanitizer as well as the sneeze guard window and gloves and masks. So we're just going forward with Alberta health regulations as best we can.
As businesses reopen, we're often reminded to support local. BCN spent time at the Main today, a Mediterranean restaurant, to see what's for lunch.
My family is originally from Lebanon. Lebanon is a little tiny country in the Middle East, beautiful country, and we moved to Lethbridge about 5 years ago. The reason I wanted to have a restaurant is because my family's been working in the business for more than 25 years, so I just want to kind of follow the legacy. We've only been here for 6-7 months, and started out really, really good. We were really busy. Once COVID hit, we slowed down for a week. But thankfully, we have really good customers. We love it. We love supporting local. They also support us. I really appreciate it. They really helped out. Even when we were shut down, they were taking takeout, curbside, and deliveries. Thanks a lot to Lethbridge and the community. We do a lot of our shopping from around Lethbridge, from a lot of the convenience stores around here, a lot of the farmers around here. We got to support each other because at the end of the day, that's all we got is each other. Bigger franchises, yes, they do depend on us too, but local small businesses really, really need your help at this time. And same here, me and Marvin, when we close on Sundays, we don't even cook. We go try out new restaurants and especially local restaurants.
An instrument that has been 6 years in the making has finally been completed. As Micah Quinn explains, two friends in Lethbridge were right in the middle of making sure that each intricate detail was made with purpose and without flaw.
This is the sweet sound of an electric cello turned steampunk. For Peter Gilligan, the thought of building an electric cello was never a top priority until his friend, Chris Hodgson Bright, mentioned it to him.
We just started right in on it. And that went for a few weeks on weekends, and he would come out and we'd work on it.
The creation of the electric steampunk cello took just over 6 years, and for Peter Gilligan, he worked long days and nights to be able to get the project done, citing the COVID lockdown as a big reason why he was able to finish the project.
It's probably over 200 hours of concentration, and I haven't been able to do that with anything.
The electric cello was inspired by the steampunk genre.
The classical cello elements, so the wood mixed with the metal components, really do have that kind of steampunk flavor to it. And then Peter's style is just so interesting and fascinating for how he builds things. So it really was a work of art that I thought was incredible how he put this all together.
Hodgson Bright says that a lot of people don't recognize the talent that is in our own backyards. All you have to do is a little searching to find it.
I think Peter's done an incredible job with this, and it just shows like the level of detail and craftsmanship that he has, and I think he's incredibly talented.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Many Canadians got pets during the recent COVID-19 lockdown. After all, they make for great companions. Dogs, like people, need social interaction. Experts say it is important for our furry friends to get time outside of the home as our world slowly reopens.
They've missed us, they've missed their friends. They actually come back in, most of them are coming back in like they didn't even skip a beat. They're coming right back, they're seeing who's here. A lot of them will smell the leash wall and they'll be like, my friend, my friend, my friend, and they're super excited. They'll come back. Some of these dogs, the owners are just opening the door to their vehicle and the dog is running straight into us. They're so pumped and it makes us feel so good. And then once they're in here, sometimes we've got to reiterate some structure again. But as soon as they realize that we're rolling it that way, they're back in sync. It's like they didn't skip a beat. If you can get them into some social setting that's structured, structure is the key because they've just been used to so much at home time and not having to be away from their owners, that it's good for them to come here and then we can help work on some of that stuff as well.
Recapping one of her top news stories, on August 31st, the city of Lethbridge will welcome its newest police chief. Chief Shaheen Medizadeh joins the LPS after serving more than 30 years with the RCMP. The incoming chief spoke with the media Friday morning and said he is humbled and honored to serve our community and lead the LPS. And a look at weekend weather. Tonight, mainly sunny with cloudy periods in the evening, remaining clear overnight, and a low of 8. Sunday, we're looking at intervals of clouds and sunshine. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible with a high of 22. As the pandemic continues, it's normal to feel increasing amounts of stress. Insecurity about your job and oversaturation of information, some of it conflicting, fear of catching the virus, stress of being cooped up over a long period of time without a social release. Dr. Gregory Jantz spoke with BCN's Jeanette Roche on why hope and health are correlated. That interview is up next.
As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to wreak havoc around the world, many are grappling with loneliness, anxiety, and depression. It seems like we've lost control and perhaps we've lost a little hope. Today's guest has some timely advice and encouragement. Dr. Greg Jantz is a psychologist and author and founder of the Center, a Place of Hope, one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. His latest book is 5 Keys to Health and Healing. Dr. Greg Jantz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, such an important topic and good to be with you today.
Awesome. So your book starts out by saying everyone struggles with challenges in life, but we all need hope. Why is hope so vital to our health?
Well, you take this panic pandemic we've been in. I'm calling it a panic pandemic, but now we've got to shift and look at this pandemic with a purpose. And the purpose has got to be we've got to reset some things in our life. And so what I talk about, and we work with folks who come in from all over to work on anxiety and depression. And the reason being is we've reached an emotional saturation point. People have reached their limit. They're on this edge of despair. And so today our topic of hope. And hope comes when you have a plan. Today, we want to help begin to create a plan for hope.
Yeah, exactly. Now, why is it that we tend to worry so much? And how can we learn to control our thought life?
Yeah, how about that? We have a lot to worry about right now, too. It's where we put our point of focus. Some of us learn to be really good worriers. And so you have a pandemic, you have a lot to worry about. And we can keep layering our life with worry, which will take us to anxiety. By the way, if you have anxiety, if you have physical symptoms. So I got sweaty palms, my heart rate's up, shortness of breath, digestive, aches and pains. You've got anxiety. So I can take worry and turn it into anxiety, but I need to stop and hit that pause button today and go, okay, what do I really need to change? Well, one of the things we've got to change is how we think. And we need to learn, what's it mean to renew our thinking? What's it mean to begin to put the truth in? Because worry and anxiety, it distorts reality.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going through that right now too, especially with everything that's going on. Yeah. Now, you suggest in your book that gratitude or a thankful heart is actually an antidote for toxic thinking. How so?
Yes, gratitude. What an interesting word at this time. You go, I don't have much to be thankful for. And we get into that thinking mode. What if the next 30 days you decided, I'm going to live a little differently. I'm going to start my day with 3 gratitudes. 3 gratitudes. I'm going to write down, I'm going to create a gratitude journal. Here you go. I'm going to start today. I'm going to write down my 3 gratitudes every day. And just maybe it's something really simple, which is usually the best gratitudes. But notice over time that gratitude begins to change our perspective. Gratitude moves us from being self-absorbed to we begin to see, well, maybe there's others I can be of help. gratitude begins to create something called optimism. Optimism means I have hope. I'm looking towards the future. So let's create more optimism right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it's so easy to allow those negative emotions to take control. So I mean, like anger and fear, right? You refer in your book to anger, fear, and guilt as an emotionally toxic trinity. Can you explain?
Oh, yes. Anger, I call them the three deadly emotions: anger, fear, and guilt. Anger, another word for anger could be hurt. Another word for anger could be frustration. Hey, by the way, we have a lot to possibly be angry and frustrated with right now. But as we start looking and going, okay, am I going to be ruled by anger and hurt? Maybe I need to figure out some forgiveness here. So there's anger. If I'm going to be healthy, I've got to learn how to deal with anger and frustration. The next one's fear, worry, anxiety. Fear is the great paralyzer. Fear keeps us in a place of paralyzation. We don't take much action. We're afraid. We hold inward. That's fear. And then there's guilt. Guilt can be usually shame. I feel like I'm defective. I'm not good enough. Something's wrong with me. So we've got to figure out, to be emotionally healthy, anger, fear, and guilt.
Wow. Now, during this COVID-19 pandemic, so many have had to live in isolation, unfortunately. Now, how does this impact our health and wellness?
Yeah. So we take quarantine, and I'm doing this because quarantine holds you in, confinement, and we mix this with it's too long. Quarantine that lasts too long ends up creating more and more anxiety and depression. So really, what we're preparing for is we have a mental health pandemic. We're going to have more mental health issues emerging, as they are already, than ever before. And so we want to be prepared to deal with this. We want to be prepared to really deal with the anxiety and depression. It's going to be, I think we could say right now, anxiety is an epidemic. Who don't you know who's struggling with some anxiety and everything that's going on? So that's why, my mission is, and our mission here at the Center, A Place of Hope, is to change lives for good, to equip you with God's help. We don't know exact outcomes, but we know that we can change our perspective. We're going to use this as a time to reset. Reset means, okay, I don't like what I'm in, but I'm going to grow. It's going to be a pandemic with a purpose for me. I'm not going to be defeated by this.
Wow. This isolation reduces the opportunity to maintain our relationships too. Now, in your book, you talk about the importance and the qualities of good relationships.
Yes. So relationships. So if we're isolated, maybe many of our relationships have been digital. Oh boy. And we've been over digitalized. Yeah, our relationships. And here's the issue. It's okay as an emergency provision to be able to have all the ways we can communicate digitally. But you know what? We need one another. And we're designed for touch. We're designed for hugs. We're designed for in-person interactions. And so let's remember the importance of that. It really is important. So as we emerge, reintegrate from all this, we need to remember real life relationships are important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, speaking of relationships, you believe that it's important to have an accountability partner. So what exactly does this mean?
Well, if we're going to keep growing, and we've come through a mode where we've been shocked and traumatized by everything, and things felt like out of our control, and now we're moving into this growth mode. It's a mode that says, well, in order to keep growing, I need accountability. I just can't say, hey, I'm going to go out and do my 20-minute walk a couple times a day. Well, who are you holding that standard with? So we all need one another.
Yeah, it helps us to stay on track, doesn't it, right? Yeah, 100%. Now, you mentioned a daily walk. So you're a psychologist, not a fitness trainer, obviously, but you say that physical fitness is very important to maintain emotional health. Makes sense.
Oh, we've got to keep the movement up. Movement is so important. Movement and water. Have your water, okay? And one of the things, when we get full of anxiety, we tend not to drink our water. We tend to drink other things. So keep water up, keep movement up. The difference over time, it's just not one time, the difference over time will make a big difference.
I'm so glad now they have those flavored waters too, because water's not my favorite. It definitely helps me get the water
Come on,
in.
let's have your water today.
Good advice. Now, I wonder how many people will continue to isolate even after the restrictions are lifted, simply out of fear. What's your advice on this?
Don't let fear keep you paralyzed. Fear distorts reality. And maybe you need to test the waters. But we have been conditioned during this period to feel fear. There's the fear of the what if. So what if? What if this virus comes back? What if? And so we have all these potential what ifs that can create fear. So just as fear is kind of contagious. If we're afraid, we all kind of run together. Remember, courageousness is contagious. So let's be courageous. Let's create a positive direction. Now, I don't mean that's super easy to do, but we can do this together. Let's be courageous.
Yeah, sounds great. It's just hard to practice sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Now, in your book, you talked about the fact that God is in control, even while so much of our lives are out of control these days, especially. So how can we learn to actually embrace this and be at peace with that?
Yeah. Here's what we need to know. It's a real test of faith. I'm going to decide fear or faith. And I got to keep deciding on this faith side. But one of the things is we're going to see, and I've seen it personally, we're going to see, wow, through all this, through this sheltering, God has been my shelter. God has been my shelter. And I'm growing through this. And every time in biblical history that God has sheltered someone and people have been sheltered, there's been a victory. So let's be on the victory outlook, shall we?
Yeah, good idea. Now, is it possible that God sometimes allows us to face uncertainty so that we learn to build our faith and trust in Him?
Yeah, that's why I say, well, how about this? Pandemic with a purpose. The purpose is I'm walking through some things that may be extremely stressful, may be really rough. I'm walking through those. Let's keep it up.
Good advice, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Jans. It was such a pleasure to have you on our show.
Nice to be with you today, and let's just say it, there is hope.
Exactly. That is Dr. Greg Jans. He is the author of 5 Keys to Health and Healing, available at aplaceofhope.com. Prior to the pandemic, the Alberta economy was already going through some tough times, but how has COVID-19 affected the real estate market? Joining me now over Skype is Courtney Atkinson, a Lethbridge real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates. Courtney, welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So please tell us, what is the Southern Alberta real estate market looking like these days with all this COVID craziness going on? I would imagine overall sales have been probably less than they were prior to lockdown.
Yeah, we saw a fairly dramatic change in attitudes and real estate volume by about March. We were actually trending to have a very good year from a sales standpoint. So in January and February, we were up 5% and 10% respectively. And then things started trailing off as soon as the announcements were made that the COVID was a real thing and it was having a real impact. And so we did see a pretty good dip through March and April for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, have people been afraid to purchase or even look at homes because of COVID? Or are you finding that it's just kind of business as usual? Those who want to buy a house are just willing to get out there and, look at houses?
Yeah, I would say that in March, there was a high degree of caution across the board. Everybody was really, really worried, and there was a lot of news feeds just really heavy with news about COVID. And I think it was really overwhelming for all of us. None of us really knew what to expect. None of us knew what the economy would look like in 4 to 6 weeks. And there was a lot of information, and I think it was just overload. And so that manifested through March being fairly quiet. And in real estate, those statistics will show up the following month. And so what that meant was that very few offers were written or received in March. And that meant that by April, we had about 50% fewer transactions happening than we did back in 2019 March. So there was certainly a significant change that happened in that period of time, but we're actually swinging back up. Like even in May right now, when you look back year over year, we're only down 25%, and the trend is looking really good for June. So it's almost as if the nerves that people had in March have kind of worked their way through, and people are feeling good again and starting to realize that, hey, listen, you know what? Our government's done a great job at social distancing and having programs in place to encourage us to be responsible. And now we're kind of seeing the fruits of those labors, I think. We really paid the price, I think, in March, and now we're starting to see that pay off.
For sure. I was actually going to ask you too, since some of the restrictions have been lifted a little bit the past month or so, and particularly even like into this week, are you finding that people are feeling a little bit more braver now to get out there?
I would say so. When we first had the announcement made in March, like everybody, we implemented policies and procedures that would help protect our families and the families of our clients. And it was high alert. There's no question about it. I think everybody in the industry was very worried, and we weren't sure what that would look like. And so were all of our clients. Now that we've been through that and we've kind of heard the news load lighten a little bit and our caseload in Alberta lighten a little bit, and indeed in Canada, I think the attitudes of people have lightened and kind of, and certainly spring helps too, having the fresh air and getting people outside tends to be a little bit more kind of encouraging. And so, yeah, I would say the attitudes have changed. People have loosened up. We're seeing fewer people concerned about what the protocol is, fewer questions about how we're navigating the process. And I would say now the shift has been that it's more our elderly clients, folks that would have justifiable reasons for being more concerned, whether they're immunocompromised or, they're elderly. They want to know exactly what we're doing to protect them. And it's our duty to have those systems in place for sure, all across the industry. In many markets across North America, real estate was not deemed an essential service. And the feedback was that the market really wanted that. There were still a number of people that wanted to buy and sell, but for whatever reason, the governments were not allowing it. So we're very fortunate in that respect. And I think it's paid good dividends in our market. We're seeing it rebound quite nicely.
Yeah, so what kind of restrictions were you putting in place? And like right now you're saying the seniors are mostly the ones that are concerned about that. What sort of things are you doing for them for safety?
Yeah, for our team, there were a few protocols that we implemented, and a lot of it we had already had in place. So much of what we do is virtually because of the nature of our office structure. We have offices across southern Alberta, so we meet a lot virtually anyway. And we've had virtual tour technology with our company for a long time, and so it really just meant that we were making sure that any prospective buyers had reviewed all of our virtual tours, that they'd reviewed all the photographs, that they had all the information about the property. And then for showings, we were limiting them to one person with one realtor, and they were expected to wash their hands in the property, wash their hands as they were leaving the property. Some were opting to wear masks, although that wasn't part of our protocol. At that time, it wasn't really something that was generally accepted to be beneficial, so we didn't implement that. But now for our clients that do prefer that, we certainly do. And the main thing is just maintaining that social distance and making sure that we're limiting as much exposure to people's properties as we can. And for those that want to go ahead and make an offer on a property, of course, there's other stakeholders that want to be involved. And if it's the property that they intend to move on, then we're okay letting a few more people in. And most sellers were okay with that too. They just didn't want open houses and that sort of thing. We're still not permitted to do open houses. So
yeah, that was actually one of my questions. I was wondering are you still holding open houses? And also, has this affected, or did you see mostly in the springtime, people not putting their houses on market as much because they don't necessarily want a bunch of strangers, traipsing through their house? Did you find that at all?
Yeah, good question. I think to address the first part of that, with the open houses, it wasn't a major concern for us. In fact, we were happy that was the case. It limited exposure. and really caused us to be able to meet people who were very interested in particular properties, and then gave us an opportunity to very carefully mitigate risk for the sellers that we represent. And then on the other side of things, I think that the other folks that were, attempting to list their properties and were thinking about what they were going to do in the spring, I would say that there was a fair chunk of them that were deferring through that March timeframe. But the interesting thing that happened is that when they did hit the market, we were seeing uptake happen really quickly. We were seeing a lot of competitive offers, a lot of multiple offers, a lot of really strong offers coming to the table. So it was almost like there was pent up demand in the buyer side that wasn't being met by sellers. So when they finally realized that there was still opportunity, I think they were met with enthusiasm and encouragement. So it was good news.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, I'm just wondering, how helpful was the use of your technology? Like you were saying, you kind of used that a little bit, but for example, like using a drone, for example, to do like a virtual tour or anything, was that really being utilized more so than normal?
Well, I wouldn't say more so than normal for us, because we do that with all of our listings. So the virtual tours, the aerial photography, professional interiors and exteriors, that's just part of our program. I would say across the industry, the access and the requirement and the expectation that the market would have for those things certainly went up. I would say one of the most interesting things for us was that, we had been meeting by Zoom or Google Hangouts as a company for a long time. And the thing that we really noticed, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of your viewers, we were just really missing each other. Like as a company, we really just missed seeing each other around the office and doing our work together. And despite seeing one another on a computer screen, we were just starting to feel like, oh my gosh, when is this going to get over? And I think collectively as a community, a lot of that happened at the same time. We were keen to get back to work and see one another. Folks were keen to get out and see properties. They were keen to get moved again. And so I think collectively, it's almost like we all had these same feelings at the same time, and the market started picking up again.
I think you're right. I think there's that pent up energy. People are just tired of being at home. So now you're an essential service, but you're saying your office actually was closed. You guys were working from home for the most part, other than when you were showing homes. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we had to stay open for cashing checks for deposits and things like that. So we would typically have somebody coming by the office twice a day to look after those types of things, offers and that sort of thing. But we were completely virtual, and we can conduct ourselves virtually fairly simply. We've done that for a long time. So it wasn't a real shift for us. It wasn't like we had to figure out how to operate our business without a building. It was just frankly that we're so collegial, like many people in the industry. We just wanted to see one another, and we missed the client engagement too, right? And so, yeah, you're right. It was so nice to get back out and see people in the community. And I just think personally, there were days that went by where I was working from home and I didn't even leave the house. Like that's not healthy, right? And I think collectively as a community, we all realized that hey, listen, you know what? There is a risk out there and it is serious, but at the same time, so is our mental and physical health, and we need to look after those things too.
Yeah, 100%. Now, you had mentioned earlier that you recently have gotten some really strong offers. So does that mean that home values have not necessarily declined? Have they increased since the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that. We've been in a fairly balanced or buyer's market since about 2010. As you well know, Alberta's had a tough time through many changes over the last decade with oil prices and difficulties with our economy. And that's manifested in real estate prices not appreciating in any real measurable way here in Southern Alberta in that time frame. That said, one of the fears that a lot of our sellers had in the beginning, back in March, was that there would be a dramatic depreciation in property values in a very near term. And that really didn't show up for us. We're seeing properties transact at approximately the same prices that they would have earlier in the spring. I think that competitiveness in the marketplace and those multiple offers was more a matter of demand. Buyers kind of anxiously waiting for sellers to put this right property up on the market and then acting very quickly. But that didn't necessarily have a change on prices.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So, Courtney, what is the average home price now in Lethbridge?
Yeah, so we're about $285 when you look across Southern Alberta, Lethbridge specifically, and that's been fairly consistent for a while. One of the things that skews the average house price in a market will tend to be the number of properties that are sold above the average and below the average. So I think what we're going to see this year, if we kind of try to predict how things are going to go, and this is also related to some of the mortgage changes that happened through the B20 legislation and some of the things that have just recently come out. We'll likely see some of the more expensive properties stagnate a little bit, possibly not transact, and maybe those folks withdraw from the market. So that could potentially just pull that statistic down a little bit. It's not necessarily reflective of the overall values in our marketplace. It just means that there's not as much uptake of those listings, let's say in the 5, 6, or 800,000 range. And not to say that they don't sell, but the volume of those particular type of listings in a year like this might not be as high as it was last year, for example.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So you mentioned 285 is about the average price, but what price range is selling the most currently?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of activity once you get up to about $350,000. Once you go above that, it does slow down a little bit. And we've sold properties, well north of that. I mean, we've sold a couple properties over $1 million already this year. So those properties are transacting. It's just the volume of them isn't quite what it might have been in another year. So right up to about 350, I would say there's good action, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit after that. You just got to adjust your expectations in terms of the time on market and how long it might take to find an attracted buyer if you're listing, say, a $500,000 or $600,000 house.
Interesting. And what are where are the interest rates headed these days?
Yeah, great question also. So interest rates are right around 3% plus or minus, depending on a few different variables. They're again all-time low. In times like this, the government's motivated to keep money in the markets. They want to keep people spending. They want to make sure that there's some liquidity out there. And so they're making money accessible to people. And as you know, there's lots of programs for businesses and for families to kind of keep people afloat during these difficult times. And they want to make sure that mortgages are affordable as well. Now, there's a little bit of shyness out there in terms of the qualification criterion. So they've tightened up in some of those ways a little bit just to make sure that they're doing additional income verification, making sure that people are still employed, even though they might have been laid off for a little while. So they're doing extra due diligence. But indeed, the prices of mortgage rates are incredible. So we're saying to everybody, hey, listen, if you're secure in your position and you're thinking about making a move, I know every realtor says this all the time, but really money's never been cheaper. So it is a great opportunity for that.
That's interesting. So what advice would you have for, like, say, a young couple trying to get things together to buy their first home? What do they need to do to get things in place financially?
One of the most important things that a person can do is just save. I think in our society, we're so drawn by things that we see on Facebook and Instagram, and you can buy pretty well anything with a couple touches of your phone on Amazon, and it's so easy to spend money. And I think collectively as a society, we've really gotten away from saving. And so one of my personal hopes that this pandemic has brought on, at least in my hope, is that it'll create a generation of savers. And so my advice to any young person is to make sure that you're saving 10, 15% of your income, put it away, just pretend that it doesn't exist, save that money. It might take you a year to save up money to buy your first home, but it is one of the best investments. And even if we're not in a market where properties are appreciating dramatically, the fact is that it's still substantially cheaper than renting, and you've got a place to call home forevermore. And it can begin one of those things that sets you up for a very successful life and a successful retirement. So we're big advocates of that. And I think one of the other small pieces that people don't realize, especially when they're younger, they'll begin that saving process and they'll start to feel that they've got some cash in the bank and they feel really encouraged by that. So then they go out and buy a quad or buy a truck or a boat or something. And of course, those things have a dramatic impact on your ability to qualify for the mortgage when the time comes. So what we say is, buy your boat the day after you take possession of your house. You want that new truck? Just wait till the day after you've moved into your house. It's much easier to get financing on a new vehicle than it is to get financing on a mortgage. So just defer those big purchases until after you've already taken possession, because you'll still get qualified, but it might not work the other way around.
Wow, that is great advice. Thank you so much for that. Courtney, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Take good care.
That is Courtney Atkinson, real estate broker with Atkinson and Associates here in Lethbridge.
We only have one shot at this life. The reality is some people succeed while other people fail. What is it that makes the difference? Dr. Paul Brownback is author of How to Succeed as CEO of Your Life. Dr. Brownback, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Dr. Brownback, what inspired you to write this book, CEO of Your Life?
Well, I spent a lot of years, Hal, just drifting through life, not really focusing on being effective in what I did. And as a result, I wasted a lot of time, a lot of years, lost a lot of opportunity. And looking back, I just didn't want other people to have that experience. And so I wrote this book to help people to not make that mistake.
Now, you're right about that succeeding at life represents our most important objective. How would you define success?
Well, Jesus defined that for us. He gave us the first and second commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor. Then he gave us a new commandment, which tells us to love one another. So success is determined by showing agape to other people. And agape love is just seeking their best interest, seeking to benefit them. And as we maximize the production of agape with our life, that is what brings success. God created us to be agape producing organisms. That's our purpose. That's what he designed us to do. And as we fulfill that design, as we use our life to maximize that production of agape, then we will achieve success.
You know, some people say the real ideal of success is the fact, or by gauging success, is how many people finish with the most amount of toys.
Oh, yes.
You know, so how do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I've seen a lot of people finish that way, and they finish with a lot of misery, and they didn't leave behind a very great legacy. And as they look toward eternity, they don't have much there either.
Now, why do you say we cannot escape responsibility for our lives?
We are born into this life. God has given us resources, and we have a responsibility to God to use those resources to be productive to the maximum for him. And there's no way to escape that. And especially when we become believers, God calls us as believers to be good stewards of the resources he's given us. So there's no way out of that. That's a responsibility either we can meet or not meet, but we can't escape it.
Now, many of us have very crazy, busy lifestyles. I know a lot of young parents that are always out there taking their kids to hockey, you know, to figure skating, piano, guitar lessons, whatever, gymnastics. You refer to chaos as our default setting. Why do you think we're hardwired like that?
We find that principle in nature, actually. In physics, we have what's called the second law of thermodynamics. And that law just says that there's this quality called entropy that is always increasing. Now, entropy is just the physics term for chaos. And we find in the physical world, if you want chaos, all you have to do is nothing. Things will become chaotic all on their own. And we find the same thing in our own personal lives. The only thing you have to do to have chaos in your life is nothing. That's the default setting. That's what will occur unless we proactively manage our lives.
Now, human nature shows that we tend to be very selfish as a society. A lot of people say, look out for numero uno, number one. How can we really change that mindset, Doctor?
Well, first of all, we have to saturate ourselves with Scripture. We have to make sure we are have a mind that's filled with the truths of the Word of God. But so much of it has to do with our thought life. The Apostle Paul, Romans 12:2, says, "Be not conformed to this world, be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And it's the mind, and specifically not what we know, but what we think about. In Romans chapter 8, it says, the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. And the Greek word for mind there specifically is talking about our thoughts. And one of the interesting things about that passage is when we look at the literal translation, it says the mind of the flesh is death, the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. It's really saying that we have two minds. And it's not even so much what we think about as which mind we're thinking with. Are we thinking with the spiritual mind? We're thinking through that carnal mind. And if we're thinking through that spiritual mind, it's going to direct us toward agape types of thoughts, which will translate into agape types of action.
Now, Dr. Brownback, I know many people who have been burned in the past from relationships, from employers, and that's why they say they're looking out for number one. What do you say to people like that?
Well, we can look at our past and we can have all kind of terrible experiences, and I'm sympathetic to that. People have gone through a lot, and yet the answer is not to be self-focused. That's just going to increase that person's negative experiences in life. Life doesn't work that way. God designed us to produce agape. If we live for number one, we're going to be miserable.
Now, you have an unusual take when it comes to the term unconditional love. You suggest that it may not be a biblical idea. Why is that?
Well, first of all, when people use the term, what they tend to be meaning is, I should love people regardless of the way they treat me, and that's good. That's a biblical concept. But the term itself, unconditional love, the idea that we love unconditionally doesn't work, because every relationship demands conditions. Let's take marriage, for example. Marriage vows, in essence, are a list of conditions. You can't have a marriage if you don't have, for example, fidelity as a condition, or living together, or loving one another. These are essential conditions for marriage. There's a psychologist by the name of Carl Rogers who taught that we should have open marriage, which means you can have relationships with anybody you want. Well, it doesn't work, and what he ends up with is not what God would define as marriage. So today there's a lot of evangelical writing about the whole idea of boundaries. We have whole books written on boundaries. Well, when people write those books, what they're really talking about is conditions. Boundaries are really just conditions, and what they're really conveying is the acknowledgement that conditions are essential.
So why is morality so important to help our lives and society in general run smoother?
Well, because morality we might define as giving other people what we owe them, and unless we do that, we can't have a good relationship. You couldn't have a relationship with somebody who perpetually lies or steals. Just wouldn't work. And likewise with morality, if we don't maintain morality, society disintegrates.
You say it's wrong to extend grace at the expense of morality. Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, morality is our foundational responsibility. That's what we owe people. Grace is giving them something that we don't owe them. So we need to give people what we owe them before we start giving away what we don't owe people. If we don't pay the electric bill so that we can give to a homeless person, well, that sounds magnanimous, but if everybody did that, the power would go off, and everybody would suffer. So morality is the foundational aspect of life, and therefore must be maintained first.
You touched a little bit on agape earlier. Doctor, you talk about micro expressions of agape. Tell me more about that.
There's a great passage, 1 Corinthians 16:14. Let all that you do be done in love. That's a powerful passage. And in essence, what it's saying is that everything we do can either be done from an agape perspective or a selfish perspective. We can do one or the other. And that not only includes the big things in life, it includes the tiny little things. It says, let everything you do be done in love. So your wife gets up in the morning and you greet her and you can say, morning. Or you can be cheerful and say, good morning, how are you, sweetheart? And so just the way we talk to people, the little things we do for people. There's a story of, true story, Dr. Jerome Motto, who is a psychiatrist in the San Francisco Police Department. And there was a man that left his apartment one night and walked to the Golden Gate Bridge, climbed over the 4-foot embankment, and jumped to his death 200 and some feet below. Well, Dr. Motto went around to his apartment to see what he could learn, and there he found on his desk a note that he had written that said, I'm going to walk to the bridge. If one person smiles at me, I will not jump. And powerful. But we think of just the little things that we can do that can make all the difference in the life of another person.
I've heard that before too. You're right. You smile at somebody, pay them a compliment, a sincere compliment, you can really make their day.
Compliments are one of the great unused resources that we have. They cost nothing. They take no energy. They're actually fun to give. It's nice to be like, well, you look nice today, or well, that was a nice thing that you did, or whatever. It's a great resource, and we miss it by not using it more.
Many people today seem to lack good discernment. How is discernment cultivated?
Well, there's another great verse of scripture, 1 Corinthians 2:16, which ends by saying, but we have the mind of Christ. And as we saturate ourselves with scripture, we can develop that mind which will give us discernment to make the decisions that confront us. There's that little wristband, what would Jesus do? WWJD. And yet we have to ask, well, how do we determine that? And we determine that by saturating ourselves with scripture. And it's not so much memorizing some proof text when we are confronted with the situation of saying, well, what verse applies to this situation? But it's more of becoming so familiar with scripture that we can think the thoughts of Christ after him.
Do you think we tend to make decisions based more on feelings as opposed to using our intellect? In other words, go with our gut instead of our heads?
Well, it's not just a matter of going with our gut. Our culture today is so tremendously feelings oriented. That's the whole gist of contemporary culture. And so feelings have a tremendously powerful pull on people today. I counseled a woman. She came in first time I saw her, and she told me she had been living with this man and gave me all the reasons why that was a really bad idea and it wasn't working and he was taking advantage of her, and she was glad that she was out of that relationship. She was never going to do it again. The next time I saw her, she told me, well, I moved back in. She said, I saw this movie, and the movie conveyed the idea of follow your heart. And she said, my heart was just with moving back in with him and into that relationship. And so that's what she did. And to me, that just exemplifies our society today. Wherever our emotions take us, that's what we do. We unplug our brain and our will and let our emotions carry us with the tide of life.
Many people would agree, Doctor, that God has a specific role for us to play in life. Any thoughts how we can discover what that unique niche really is?
Well, first of all, we have to be proactive. We have to be intentional. And that gets down to really to the heart of the book. The need to be intentional in seeking what God has for us. And then there's some steps that we can take. First of all, we need to take inventory of the resources God has given us, the capabilities He's given us, spiritual gifts, natural gifts. But above and beyond that, we have a whole lot of other resources. For example, being a citizen of a certain country gives us latitude that other people might not have. The languages we know, the degrees that we have, the network of friends that we have, and so forth. So take inventory of all those things, and then look at those opportunities and see where we can best plug in those resources. I've seen Christians who seeking God's will, and they just spend all this time in prayer, which is a great idea, but they never do any research on what opportunities are out there and available to me that might fit my package of resources. So we need to discover the package of resources, and then we need to look for opportunities, and then we need to spend a lot of prayer to discern where those resources, what particular opportunity where they fit the best.
Dr. Paul Brownback is author of How to Succeed as CEO of Your Life. Thanks a lot for joining me today from North Carolina.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.